Hello and welcome to a Nexus Fertility webinar. Today I'm really delighted to be joined by Rebecca Coxon, who is a now author. So congratulations, Rebecca, on your recent publication.
Thank you.
And it has a really interesting story, one that is so relevant for our audience, donor conception. It comes up a lot in our community. Many people like myself are either considering it, going through it, or on the other side. And I'm really excited for this conversation because I get to learn a lot as well. I'm so grateful for you sharing your story because, yeah, donor recipient parents like me, we're always learning. We're learning on the job. You do a lot of work before you make that decision, but that never stops. So, yeah, thank you. So, without further ado, I will just introduce you. So, Rebecca, as I said, is an author and a TV documentary director. Her recently published book, Inconceivable, is a memoir about her experiences accidentally discovering she was donor conceived in her late 20s, donating her own eggs to a stranger, and then struggling with endometriosis and infertility herself. The book explores infertility through the lens of history, religion, and ethics as she interviews her own anonymous sperm donor and the doctors who treated her parents in the 1990s in an effort to understand how and why such a big secret was kept from her and her siblings. Rebecca is one of triplets, both a product and patient of IVF, and is now a mum to a lovely 7-month-old boy. So, thank you for joining me, Rebecca.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. My pleasure, completely. And yeah, this webinar would be helping so many people. When I mentioned it in one of our recent support groups that we run, that we were having you on, there were so many guys that were delighted to hear it because there are people that are reading your book. So
Oh, great. Oh, that's good to hear.
yeah, it's great to have you. So without further ado, let's get into it. Let's get into the you know quite a big topic really from the outset, but
Yeah.
discovering that you were donor conceived. So I think if we take it right back about your understanding of your family story when you were growing up.
Yeah, so I grew up with a mum, a dad, and three siblings. I'm one of triplets, as you said, and we have an older brother who's about 4.5 years older than us. Um, so pretty normal family in one sense, apart from being triplets, obviously. Um, and yeah, we had a great childhood. We grew up in a my parents own a bit of woodland, so we did a lot of climbing trees. We always had people to play with, having so many siblings. We did a lot of sports. We went to a good school. We all did really well at school. Um, and that was kind of, I remember sort of being maybe in my early teens and doing a bit of research about triplets and realizing that we were really uncommon. And obviously, people always asked us questions about that. And then I once asked my mum, I said, spontaneous triplets are really, really rare, but IVF triplets are quite common. Which one are we? Um, and I think she sort of dodged the question at that point. But then a couple of years later, we learned about IVF in a school RE lesson, and asked my mum outright in the car home if we were IVF, and she went quiet and said she'd have to speak to dad first before she talked to us. So that was weird. And then later that night, she sort of said, "Yes, you were IVF. We had to go through fertility treatment, have you?" And that was it. And that was my story. That was our story for years. There was nothing else that I'd ever suspected. I'd always been told I looked like my dad, me more so than my other siblings. Um, and then when I was 25, I decided to join a DNA website because, well, one of the reasons was because my dad was adopted, and I thought, oh, it'd be interesting to just see, where his parents and grandparents came from. Not really to track anyone down. I thought, they'd probably be dead by now or whatever. But so I did that, and I also thought, oh, it'd be interesting to just find out a bit more about my, health and any genes that I have. So I joined 23andMe. I did tell my mum before I joined, and she tried to put me off quite discreetly, but she just sort of said, you might find out something you don't want to know to do with your genes. And I said, no, I'm not worried about that. Um, And then I joined. There was no close relatives. I was interested to find out, that I had a slight predisposition to late onset Alzheimer's, and that was it. And then that was it for a few years until one day I was at work and I logged onto the website again, and it said I had a half sister on the paternal side, which obviously didn't make any sense to me. So I called my mum. She went silent on the phone. I think I was about 27 at this point. Um, and then I ended up going home that weekend. We were all gathering together for Easter, my whole family and our partners. And I sort of got them in a room, just me and my mum and dad, and asked them what was going on. And that's when they had admitted that, yes, they'd had to go to a clinic to use IVF because my mum had endometriosis, but they'd also found out that dad's sperm wasn't viable, and the option they were given was to use a sperm donor.
Wow. Wow. And how did that feel in that moment when they revealed that to you in that room?
Um, in one sense, it was a little bit of a relief because I had that whole week been wondering what, I'd been going around scenarios in my head thinking, has my dad donated sperm to another family? Because on the half sister's bio on her page, it said that she was born in the same hospital as me 6 months earlier, and she was looking for her sperm donor. So either my dad was her sperm donor or we shared a separate sperm donor. So I was just relieved to have gotten the answer out of them because they were really reluctant. But I was just really like, so, and I recount this scene in detail in the book. My dad started crying. My mum was sort of looking off into the distance. They'd never told anyone. The only people who knew were the doctors that treated them. They didn't tell their friends, that any relatives. So I was basically the first person in 30 years who'd known. And my dad was really upset about it. And I never saw my dad upset. So I was just really kind of embarrassed, and I just wanted it to stop. And I kind of wish I'd never found out. And yeah, it was just a bit sad, really. I asked them a few questions, but it felt like I was making it worse. I was like, well, what do you know about the donor? And, what did they tell you? And so, yeah, it was just a bit overwhelming. And in that moment, I forgot to say, we kind of decided not to tell my siblings. So for 3.5 years, my siblings didn't know.
Wow. And God, there's so much to unpack there, but like going forward to that moment, then what happened and how was that disclosed to your siblings?
So my parents basically never really mentioned it again, which I've never blamed my parents for keeping this secret. And it's one of the reasons I wrote the book was to kind of understand more about why parents were encouraged to keep those secrets back then, and, learn about the stigma that existed back then and still, to a degree exists today. So I don't blame them for that, but I do sort of wish they'd supported me a bit more after finding out and not just kind of put the lid back on. Um, so I sort of told a few of my friends, but I was always really careful not to tell anyone who knew my siblings. But I was always worried that, at a Christmas do, like my partner would accidentally tell somebody. It becomes quite difficult to keep secrets and just be on edge all the time that something's going to slip out because it feels like such a big thing. Um, but I'd sort of decided, well, my parents don't want them to know. I wish I didn't know, so I'm just going to keep it a secret. That's the best thing for everybody. And then I think there were a few reasons why I ended up deciding to tell them. And one of them was because in my work, I was a documentary maker and I was filming people all the time, revealing big secrets and trying to overcome shame and stigma. And it felt a bit hypocritical to be keeping my own secret when I was thinking, nobody's talking about this and nobody's going to overcome that shame unless we talk about it. But also I wrote a letter to like a kind of agony aunt type person who's one of my favorite authors, Cheryl Strayed. She's American. I wrote a letter to her being like, what should I do? And I recount this in the book. And she didn't actually reply to me, but she did reply to another letter of a woman who had had sperm donor conceived triplets herself. Weirdly, a very similar story to my own. And in her reply, she was like, "You need to tell them. You need to tell them the truth."
Mm.
And it was such a beautiful response, but it was very like, "You need to tell them." And I thought, okay, this is kind of indirectly telling me as well. I need to tell my siblings. If my parents aren't going to tell them, I need to, and I'm going to do it in the best possible way, the way that I wish I'd been told. So I did loads of research. I listened to like books about audio books about how to deliver bad news. Um, I got them little gifts with our photos printed on them. And then I kind of orchestrated it that we would all be together at my big brother's house with our partners, but without our parents there. It was really important to me that I broke the news to them without them having to worry about my parents' feelings on top of their own. So yeah, I was really, really worried about it, and it went really, really well. They were completely, they just didn't react that much, to be honest. They were really understanding. They were just sad that I had to keep the secret. They were most concerned about me and the fact that I'd had that burden. Um, and that's kind of how it's been ever since. They've showed different levels of curiosity about, the donor and the half siblings and stuff. But for me, it just really went to show how different it is being, accidentally finding out a secret and the kind of shame that intrinsically comes with that versus intentionally being told something from a place of love.
Mm. And just to clarify, but your older brother, he was also conceived
Yeah,
via donor sperm, was it? Yeah, yeah.
he was, yeah. And my parents actually didn't know if they used the same sperm donor. So
Wow.
and again, this is another interesting scene in the book where I have to tell my mum that they used a different sperm donor because they never asked the clinic. So yeah, so my brother's got a different sperm donor and has done his own sort of had his own little journey with trying to find out who he was. Um, but yeah, so the way I found that out was because I asked my sperm donor, who had joined the 23andMe website a year after I joined. Interestingly, I asked him when he started donating, and he'd started donating too late for my brother to have been conceived.
Wow. Wow. What, I mean,
Yeah.
I I could go on for 2 hours here. I'm not going to. Um, but there's just so much there. I mean, I was going to go back to that moment of you finding out on your parents, but I think what's really striking for me here is that 3 years where you knew and you had addressed it and had that conversation with your parents, but then you kept it a secret as well. And there's a real kind of inverse relationship here. Then suddenly you're carrying that as well, which they had for so long, for 25 years. How did that feel for you?
You know, I had a lot going on in my life at the time. I was making some really difficult documentaries. I was kind of just my whole life was at a million miles per hour. And for me, I just was like, I cannot deal with anything else on top. And the thought of, you know, sitting my siblings down and having to manage their emotions and make sure they're okay and navigate all this stuff. I mean, in hindsight, I now know we could have all just gone through it together and but at the time I thought I was doing the best thing. I was like, well, I'm protecting them in the same way that my parents thought they were protecting me. And obviously, in the back of my head, I know that secrets like this aren't right to keep, but my parents kind of made me believe that it was okay to keep, and so I kept it for them. But really, yeah, it's just been so much better since it's been out, and I don't have to think about it. It was weighing me down, and you can always just say to yourself, it's not the right time, it's not the right time. I was like, oh, I'm too busy, and my brother was struggling with his own mental health. My older brother was about to get married. I was like, it's not the right time now. And then obviously years and years go by, and I know this, with um parents who've got donor conceived children, they go years or decades without telling them because it is never the right time. And the reality is that you are just carrying that weight with you anyway. And actually, the relief that you get when you do tell them is worth doing it sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Yeah. When you were talking about that moment in the room with your parents, really empathize with them, like, having, and I know we'll come on to it. Of course, you have as well been through fertility treatment, and that is so life-changing in itself and stressful and traumatic, and then add on that an extra layer of a male factor fertility issue being there and what they would have had to go through. And it was bad enough when I was going through it from 2017 onwards, but take minus
Yeah.
out like 30 years or so.
Yeah.
Wow, like the internet wasn't there. Men would have been kind of very much, we're still struggling to get out of that era of men don't talk. Like there is a change, but yes, your dad
Well,
would
and
have
even
firmly
even
been in that
IVF,
era.
even
Yeah.
IVF was so stigmatized. My parents didn't tell my grandparents, their parents, that we were IVF because one of my grandmas thought that it created monster children. That
Mm,
was the stigma that they were up against within their own family.
wow.
And my grandparents were mildly religious, but you can only imagine what a religious family would be going through. And I really do think that had my parents have told people, also my aunt had come across donor conception in the news or something and told my parents that she thought it was like adultery and it was awfully wrong. And my dad said he's never forgotten that. So had they have told their own family members and friends, I honestly believe they probably would have been persuaded out of it. And they
Yeah.
wouldn't have had the family that they so desperately wanted and the amazing, loving family that we are. So
Yeah.
I completely understand, and I'm so pleased that we've come so far now that we actually are talking about it. As you say, men in particular are now talking about it, thank goodness.
Yes, yeah, just about turning the corner, I think.
Just about.
But yeah, certainly with IVF, that's completely normalized. But there are a lot of misconceptions. Like people assume that having fertility treatment just equals a child, which
Mm,
is not the case at all. And it is a journey, a roller coaster, and there's no certainties. And yeah, coming what sometimes you can hang on words that people use. Like I have a
mm.
few throughout ours that still stick with me now that I hate that people said, and yeah, just
Yeah.
really hard for them. So, did they explain at all what they were kind of advised when they were going through it, and then opting to use a sperm donor?
I sort of get quite a vague answer when I asked them. I think at first my mum said that they were advised to keep it a secret, and then since then I think it was possibly more of a kind of unspoken thing. Now for the book, I did go and interview the doctor who treated my parents, and also the embryologist who, put us together in the petri dish. Um, he's named Professor Simon Fisher. He's quite well known. He was a pioneer of ICSI and IVF, and the doctor who treated my parents was in the room when Louise Brown was born. So they were super experts in their field. And I think it was kind of like, well, what's the point? Why would you tell them? Because they're never going to find out. The internet didn't exist. You couldn't sequence your DNA genome back then, never mind the idea of uploading it to a intricate web, in the ether and then be matched with your donor in seconds. Like Simon said to me, he said, the only way that a donor would have been able to be, that anyone would have been able to match the donor with the child was if somebody had broken into our clinic and found the donor numbers and somehow matched them. Like it was just impossible. So I think they thought they were probably protecting the parents and the children by just saying, well, they'll never know, so what's the point? And obviously the law backed that up. It was completely anonymous back then. um and now we're in a kind of interesting ethical situation where lots of donors who donated before 2005 are being tracked down, and the children want to know where they've come from, but the donors haven't necessarily ever accepted that that might have been the reality one day, that they would have to come clean, as it were.
Yeah, and of course, people who would have donated are also doing it on based on the working knowledge of the time and the thinking and the
Yeah.
advice. So, a really difficult situation. So I wonder how that impacted you, your kind of identity, and just onward relationships with your parents from that point, from that moment where you found out and confronted them in their room.
Yeah, I think for the first sort of 6 months or a year, I did feel a little bit like there was a something separating me and my dad. Like I just felt like there was a bit of a like, and I think it's probably because we weren't speaking about it. It just sort of happened, and then we didn't speak about it. So there was that. We did have one conversation that night where my dad sort of called me over and said, it doesn't change anything, does it? And I said, no, like it just makes me realize how wanted we were. I knew we were wanted, but now I know we were really wanted. So that was a kind of nice moment with us. But it was more like I didn't want my dad to feel like he was separate from us as well because he was adopted, so he doesn't have any genetic relationship to any of his family. So there's always been a little bit of a sadness there, and he's not great at talking about his emotions. But the reality is, like, I can't stress this enough, like my family are so brilliant, and the fact that they've like actively encouraged me and supported me in publishing this book, from going 360 to it's a complete secret no one's ever known to actually, yeah, go ahead, tell the world we trust you, it's your story to tell, just shows how brilliant they are. So yeah, it hasn't changed anything. If anything, it has brought us closer together. We don't have any secrets anymore. They're all really proud of what I've done and what I'm continuing to do by talking about this stuff. So yeah, I think I did go through a bit of an identity crisis at the beginning, but that was more to do with the fact that it was a secret than, the actual reality of the donor conception side of it.
Yeah, I love that. And on a similar but different situation, but I didn't tell my friends when I was going through all the fertility stuff, and I did 3 years on. And the way in which they received it was so good, and it made me realize that, oh, I wish I had done that before. But similar, I think, from what you were saying, I believe that that's leveled up our friendship because now we are a lot
Mm,
more as blokes, we're a lot more open with each other because one of us showed a bit of openness and vulnerability, and so I take credit for that. But
yeah.
yeah, I think so when someone does when there is something that opens up it to a different level, a new level, it can change things, and yeah, I'm so pleased that that was the outcome for you, and yeah, that was really touching. It really just made me feel emotional when your dad took your side and asked that. It's just
Yeah.
bless him. It's just that he must have the fear that he must have had when in that room, and then to get that reassurance from you there and then, it's really
Yeah,
lovely.
and I've always thought it's the hardest person this has been on is not me, it's my dad. And I've spoken to parents of child of donor conceived children who I can just see the weight of the world on their shoulders. They're so worried about how their children will react, or how, they've told their young children and they're worried about how, and I just think take the pressure off. Like, we don't mind how we were conceived. We just, like, I feel so lucky to have been brought up in a family that actually wanted me. I know loads of people who are from families that kind of are indifferent. They don't have a good relationship. I've filmed loads of families for documentaries where, their parents are abusive or neglectful, and they're conceived, naturally. And I just think I'm so lucky to have been so wanted.
Yeah, and I think that's so true. That's how I try and parent. Is just going all in, fully present, and it without trying to put words in your mouth. But it sounds like for you that's what a family always was. It was that the love, the laughter, the presence, the
Yeah.
climbing trees, and of course that is just not dependent on a biological link.
No, not at all.
Yeah, really touching. Thank you. Yes, it's wonderful for me to hear that. As I said, I'm learning all the time as well. So you navigated that your own like what is very life changing maybe, and like redefining and just having to go on that emotional journey yourself, and especially then coming on to sharing it with your siblings, but then a bit later down the line when you came to try and conceive, though, you found out that that wasn't going to be as easy as probably that we all assume it will be.
Yeah, so like my mum, I was diagnosed with endometriosis in my late 20s. I was surgically diagnosed, and it wasn't on my ovaries and fallopian tubes, but it was basically everywhere else. So the surgeon sort of said, if you do want children naturally, then you should have them in the next couple of years. But at the time, my boyfriend wasn't ready at all, and he wanted to wait about 10 years. So that was tricky and sort of set an alarm clock off in my head a little bit. That relationship ended not too long after. And in my next relationship, I thought, I'm going to be quite upfront about this, and I'm not going to beat around the bush. I'm going to say, I would like kids in the next few years. I've been told that it might be difficult for me. How do you feel about that? And he was like, yeah, okay, cool. And then the pandemic hit, and I had done various research about donation, obviously, since finding out I was donor conceived, and I decided to donate my own eggs. Because I learned there was a shortage of egg donors, and I thought at that time wasn't going to tell my siblings, and I just thought it'd be a nice way to sort of pay it forward, close off that chapter, do something nice for somebody else. I had friends who were going through fertility issues. I realized how precious eggs were, could be to another person, and I was just flushing them down the toilet every month. And I thought as well, I've just been told this stuff about my own fertility. It would be a good way to just check in on the state of my infertility, because endometriosis is funny. Like, it can, like my mum, it can block your fallopian tubes and prevent you ever getting pregnant, or it can, you might not have any problems at all. So I decided to donate my eggs, and I knew that it was a bit like a fertility MOT doing that. You can you get told your AMH levels, and it's a good indicator of your egg reserve. So I did that. I was told that my egg reserve was on the low side, but it was enough to donate, which was a relief. At that point, the sperm donor had signed up to the website, and I had been in touch with him, ironically, because they wouldn't let me donate unless I had a full health history on the paternal side. So I got in touch with them and said, hello, do you mind answering these questions about you? There's more to that story than I've just said. I've just summarized it. It's in the book. But so anyway, so I donated my own eggs, and then my new partner still wasn't ready. And then a few years later, we started trying, and we didn't get pregnant. And month after month, and I was pretty terrified by this point, because it had been about 5 years since my surgery, and my endometriosis was getting worse every month, and my egg reserve was low. So we were referred for IVF. And then, spoiler alert for this chapter of the book, but my partner broke up with me in the middle of the IVF. So it was 2 or 3 days before the egg retrieval, and he decided he still wasn't ready, and literally abandoned me. So it made what was already, obviously, as you said, quite a traumatic and intense process even worse, because then I was in my early 30s. I was left with just they still agreed to go and retrieve my eggs, luckily, and freeze them, but they said, we can't continue with this. We don't fund single women on the NHS, so you're going to have to pay to store them. And yeah, so then I had to start dating again in my early 30s with some frozen eggs, and no idea if I was going to have kids.
Wow,
Yeah.
incredible. And yeah, what you said actually about paying it forward and wanting to donate your eggs, that was very similar to the donor profiles, that some of the donor profiles that we saw actually. That, as you all know, it's not compulsory to write a kind of bio pen picture or anything like that. But 2 of the 6 that we whittled down to had, and it really humanized them, and we were actually really drawn to them. But both of those were donating because their wives needed donor eggs, and they wanted to. They were so grateful for the gift that someone else gave them that they wanted to. And yeah, it does, yeah, and especially in this country where you're not, there's no financial gain for it. It's your expenses are covered. So to know that altruism exists, and it in a really heartbreaking situation and traumatic, stressful, everything else, it does restore your faith a bit. So on behalf of whoever was the beneficiary of yours, thank you. And is that something that you explored that at all? Or was
Yeah,
it,
so at the end of the book, I I talk about how, so I found out that my recipient got pregnant. So all I was told was that she was a single woman in her 40s who'd been trying for years and years to have a baby with no luck. I got told she was pregnant, that was it. And then at the end of the book, I had to write an epilogue because lots of things happened after I handed in the manuscript. And part of that was that I messaged the clinic to say, because you're legally allowed to know if a child was born and the sex of the child. And they said, yes, a baby girl was born in 2022. And since the book's come out, she's actually put two and two together and sent me an email saying
Wow.
that she's got a gorgeous 4-year-old now, and just saying again how grateful she was. And it just, obviously I cried when I got her email, and I was just so pleased that she's, she said she'd been trying with IVF for 8 years, and yeah, she's got a 4-year-old, and she wants to kind of keep the conversation open with me if possible, because she knows that I know both sides of it, and just she doesn't know in the long run what she wants to do, but she's obviously going to tell her, but she's a bit worried about it. But she just said she felt reassured to know that there could be an open line of communication with us. And obviously I'm just like, whatever you want, it's led by the child. Like, if she ever wants to contact me, that's fine. If not, that's fine too. But yeah, it was kind of sort of magical ending to the whole book thing, to know that, yeah, she's got this lovely 4-year-old.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, it really is, and yeah, it's great. And before I wanted to touch upon you with your donor, but before I do that, I want to kind of close the loop of your own story, because kind of so yeah, I know there was you say about spoiler alerts. There was definitely one in your introduction
Yeah.
bio, but yeah, so yeah, literally, my mouth dropped when you said
Yeah.
about your partner leaving you. So
Yeah.
what happened? How did your fertility journey come to a conclusion?
So, yeah, this book is as much about heartbreak and relationships as it is anything else. So I did start dating again in my early 30s. And one of my best friends who lives near me, she broke up with her boyfriend at the same time as well. And she was a bit older than me. She was 37. And we both wanted kids. We'd both been trying for kids, and it wasn't working. And now we both found ourselves single. And I was 32, and I thought, I'll give it till I'm 35 before I go down the sperm donor route myself if I'm still single. And she was like, I don't have that long to wait. I'm going to do it now. So she bought some sperm online, the official way, from a bank through her clinic. And she was just over at my house a couple of hours ago. She's got a 9-month-old baby boy, and I've got a 7-month-old baby boy, because I was very lucky. I happened to meet, well, I had a terrible time dating for a few months, and then I met Ollie, who's brilliant. And again, it's hard when you've got fertility issues and you're dating in your 30s as a woman, as you can imagine, because you want to know if the people you're dating want kids or not, but you don't want to scare them off. And luckily Ollie wasn't too scared off, and he agreed to start trying, after a while of getting to know each other. And we didn't get pregnant straight away. It took 10 months, and we had been referred for IVF. It was very expensive. We weren't entitled to it on the NHS because of my previous experience. And so we looked at going abroad, and then I said, we'll do that after, we'll book the flights after I've handed in the book manuscript. And then the same week that I handed in the book manuscript, I got pregnant naturally, bizarrely, after years of trying. It just happened, and now we have a 7-month-old baby boy. So
Amazing.
yeah.
Good old Ollie as well.
Yeah, he's
Yeah,
great.
yeah, amazing. What amazing, and like you said, you're writing the book throughout all this time, and then life is still progressing, and there's more to the story as well.
Yeah.
So I've got some. Before we come on to the book, I just want to kind of just touch upon your relationship, if like, or whatever, what contact there has been with the sperm donor. How has that played out for you? I know you mentioned you have contacted him for the medical history, for
Yeah.
example.
So I would say I'm quite lucky in the fact that my donor got curious about what had happened to his donations years before, and he decided to join a DNA website, and sort of, make contact with whoever wanted to make contact with him. I know a lot of donors pre-2005 who were guaranteed anonymity haven't done that. Most haven't done that, and lots probably don't want to be contacted. So I do count myself lucky that he was open to that. And for me, it's never, it was never ever about I want a dad figure in my life, or I want to meet him and blah blah blah. It was just, who is he? Do I already know him? Have I passed him in the street? What health stuff does he have? Does he look like me? That's basically it. However, what happened was I got matched with this half sister. She's a twin. I met up with them pretty soon after we matched up. And then a year later, they both texted me saying he's joined the website. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, what are the chances, after, 28 years of anonymity, and then he's decided to join the website at the same time as us. They have a different relationship with their father. They're not particularly close to their father, I think, from what I can gather. And they just sort of started sending messages to the donor, asking just general questions. He was replying straight away. And they were just keeping me updated with that. I didn't really have any interest in speaking to him myself, and they were asking him all the questions anyway. And then, as I say, I just got in touch with him to ask him more specific questions about his health background for me to donate my eggs. And then during COVID, during the lockdowns, they set up a Zoom call with him, and I decided to join. Why not? It turns out that he had also matched with some other children, donor conceived children, through the HFEA. So I think there's about 8 of us. 2 of them live in Russia, interestingly. And there's a whole story about that in the book, which is really interesting. So yeah, I had a few Zoom calls with all of us, and then have exchanged emails a few times with him. And then I thought, well, I'll interview him for the book if he's open to it. So I said, how do you feel about having a Zoom chat? I'm writing this book. And he was very open to it, and he sort of answered all my questions. And that for me that's as far as I don't want to meet up with him. A couple of them have met up with him. Again, a couple of the other, so there's a lot of twins. One of the other sets of twins, their dad was quite old when they were born, and he passed away. So they haven't. It's for me. It's been I've got a dad who I love, and who I don't. That's I would never meet up with the donor mainly for that reason, because I don't want to upset him, and I don't need another dad. My dad's perfect. But as I say, other donor conceived people have different experiences and different family setups. So yeah, a couple of them have met him. I don't think that'll ever be me. But yeah, I'm pleased that he's been able to answer my questions.
Yeah. And that's especially medical background and history, because they disclose again what they know at the time, but there's things that we often don't know about ourselves that come to light down the line. And it's what I say to anyone who's considering any kind of donor recipient parenting, is that this is not a decision that you can just make and then move on from, because every time you go to the doctors, the hospital, the first question they're going to ask is, what's the medical history? Do you have any medical history of this? And 50% of that, or at least, unless it's it could be more with donor embryos, but you just don't simply know. And that reminder's always there. You've talked earlier about resemblance. We always get told that my son looks like me, much to my wife's annoyance. No one ever says he looks like her. And interestingly, people who know our stories well say to my wife, "Oh, yeah, never to me, but I know the story, but my word, doesn't Ray look like Sean?" And
Sure.
there's so much that goes into that, there isn't there? Like kind of just character traits, and what we nurture, and how we dress, how we like. I live vicariously through his hair, because it's just so epic, and I style it with every day like I wish I could style mine. It's just it's that is what we came on to earlier, was that presence and that joy in the everyday, and that's what people see. I've had someone who was concerned once about using a sperm donor, because he said he had this fear that he'd be in a play park one day with a wished for child, and that someone would say, "Hey, who are you? You don't look like that child. Who are you?" And I said, "But they won't see that. they'll see love and laughter and connection. That's what people see, and it's. But I understand as well those irrational fears and thoughts that people can have. So it's all, and that's why, stories like yours are so important. And segue nicely into the book. I think you've got a copy with you there.
Yeah, looks like this.
Congratulations. I know
Thank you.
someone, she was actually at your launch at the Waterstones, who is going through the process of writing a book. And so I know
Yeah,
just how hard work it is. So, you've got there, you've done it's an incredible story that needs to be shared. So congratulations to you.
thank you.
And so you already answered it, but one of the things I was thinking of when you've spoken to your siblings, because there are other siblings, not to mention your parents, but they were all really supportive. So what was it specifically that compelled you to? I mean, it's a hell of a story, and it
Mm.
deserves to be shared. But what was it that compelled you to put this in writing and publish a book?
I think, I mean, I've always written. I've actually, as well as making documentaries, I've been a ghostwriter for 10 years. So I've written other people's books, and always thought I would write my own. Didn't know really what about. Probably fiction, which I'm writing now. But this kind of hit me in the face, and then I thought, well, it would make a good article because lots of people find out they don't are conceived. DNA websites, everyone's got a story, and then just more stuff just kept happening and kept happening and kept happening, um, and and then obviously then I struggled with my own stuff. I did loads of research, and so the book has also got lots of other kind of famous figures and histories, stories of infertility in it, and I go into the history of donor conception and IVF. And just found all these amazing stories and thought, okay, this is a book. Actually, this is book length. And started sort of writing it. I was sort of like booked a week off work to go on a tutored writing retreat to sort of test the waters to see if anyone else thought that it was worth writing. And this was before I'd even told my siblings the truth. And got loads of really good feedback, and everyone was like, yeah, keep writing it. Learned how to pitch it to agents, because you need an agent usually who then pitches it to publishers. In the meantime, told my siblings the truth. That all went well. Carried on sort of writing this book proposal, and then I sent it out to a few sort of dream agents, and loads of them got back to me straight away and was like, yes, this is so timely, and what a great story. So then I was like, okay, I'm going to have to tell my parents that I'm writing this. I can't go any further with this, because if they say absolutely not, we don't want you to write this story, it was a secret, then I wouldn't have done it. But as I say, I've got amazing parents, and I sat them down and I said, I'd like to. Well, at the time, I'd also just started a master's degree in creative writing, so I thought maybe they've clocked that I might want to write about our story. And I said, I've started pitching it, and but don't, if you don't want to. Anyway, my dad just said, I'm 100% behind you. Like, I fully support you. Let's open a bottle of prosecco to celebrate. So that was really, really nice. And then my agent pitched it. We got 7 publishers interested. It turned into a bidding war, and it was just an absolute dream come true. Which was also great because that was a few months after I'd been abandoned during my IVF. So I really, really needed something good news. So then I carried on writing it, and sort of took a break from TV, did my master's degree, and yeah, here we are. Now it's been published as of 6 weeks ago.
It's incredible, and the fact that there were so many publishers vying for that book just shows how important your
Mm.
story is. And what is it for you personally? I mean, obviously they've seen the value in that. But what is it that you hope that readers take from the book?
Yeah, I really want. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot of people who don't really understand. Like, even now, I'm having interviews with people, and they kind of don't understand the difference between IVF and donor conception, for example. They think that they're the same thing. So it's good to just sort of like iron out that stuff, and get people using the right language for these kinds of stories. But also just, yeah, I just, for the normal reader, I just want them to empathize with, there's some real, like, this book is so honest and intimate. Like, I really don't sugarcoat anything. Like struggling with infertility for me was horrific. Like it was really, really hard. And there was lots of different types of infertility in the book. You know, there was me not being able to get pregnant, but there's also me not having a partner to get pregnant with, or me being with a partner who wasn't ready for several years. That was really hard because I was like, the clock's ticking and I don't know whether to wait. I also interview several other people in the book, you know, a friend of mine who's had recurrent miscarriages. Um, so, you know, I just want to open the conversation about the whole subject. And also, it was really important to me to frame it within history because the story of humanity is a story of fertility. You know, they're not separate things. They are the same thing. We can't look at history without looking at all the different and also what I found really enlightening was that donor conception might be a new thing in because we're talking about it now, but it's been around for hundreds of years, you know, in different guises. Um, and also I go back as far as the Bible, you know, there was so much infertility in the Bible, so many different ways that families were conceived, and the way that they got around infertility to create their families. So I want people to know that this isn't just a new thing. This is just us talking about it now, but it has been going on for thousands of years. And yeah, for anyone who has struggled with infertility or is going through IVF or donor conception or whatever, I just want them to feel, you know, not alone and that you know, hopefully they feel understood. I've had loads of messages from strangers just saying, you know, I feel heard, I feel seen, I thought I was alone. Thank you so much for writing this. And really, it's just the book that I would have wanted to have read when I was feeling a bit lost and overwhelmed when I got my news. So
Amazing. A really a great North Star to have when you're writing this. What would I have needed?
yeah,
And yeah, validation that's so important. So yeah, thank you so much. Now, before we wrap up, and I'm very conscious of the time, you mentioned about kind of talking to people who don't know the difference between X, Y, Z, or don't know all of the many acronyms or whatever else that come, all the new words that come with fertility treatment, donor conception, etc. But I was very grateful to be able to put out that to our community and to my Instagram that I was interviewing you today. And so I've got loads of questions coming, but I'm going to pick out a couple because of kind of the amazing conversation we've had has gone over what I promised for your time. So I'll
that's all
be
right.
respectful of it. Are there anything? So yeah, really great question. And again, one for the, I like to think that I might have navigated quite well, but of course, it'd be interested to hear your take. But is there anything that donor recipient parents get wrong or underestimate when it comes to donor conception?
I think it's really important to process your own sort of emotions about it and leave that to the side when you speak to your child about it because the most conscious thing for me has been I don't want to upset my parents. Um, but I'm also a curious person and uh, me having any sort of interest in who my donor is a completely separate thing and does not negate the love or loyalty that I have to my parents. Um, so I think separating those two things is really important. And any curiosity that the child shows does not mean they don't love or care about you at all. You know, and I think maybe putting yourself in the shoes of a donor conceived child and just thinking, well, you know, I would probably quite like to know what my donor looks like or what job they have or you know and what kind of personality they have but it doesn't mean that I don't you know that I'm not grateful for my parents you know so you know my parents didn't really get the opportunity to do any of that kind of grieving or processing back then you know counseling was very very limited and frankly from what I've heard not very good at all so I think yeah just being mindful of that and actually probably encouraging your child to explore that. They may not want to, and if they do, supporting them and not shunning it to the side and making them feel ashamed for doing that. Because I think
Mm,
that just closes off the communication between you and them as well. When actually, the way you frame it could just be, wow, we're so lucky to have you. This kind stranger gave us a gift. How magical that your story, and you were never anyone else's. You were just ours, and that this was the only way we could make you. How amazing. Like I just really think it's a celebration that we have this technology. I really do.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. And that's how we frame it as well. And a great point you mentioned that it's one thing that we did when considering it is that you have to take that third party view of what at that time an unconceived child, let alone unborn, might want and think later down the line. And it's hard to do. It takes a lot of exploration, but it's not just
Mm.
about two intended parents at that point. It's about an unconceived child. So it's you have to consider them in everything that you do because yeah, it's a big thing, and I think anyone considering bringing a child into the world, donor conception or otherwise, should be going through the hard conversations, big thoughts. But as we know, some people don't. But yeah, certainly when it comes to assisted conception and third party conceptions, etc. So yeah, and thank you for that. I was looking through some of the other questions. I'm really grateful actually that we've through this very insightful and rich conversation. We've covered quite a few of them actually. Now, there's one thing here that I actually haven't heard, but I don't know if you have. Certainly in your search for like genetic background and history, it says often I have heard that knowing your genetic heritage is a human right. What is your take on that?
Mm. You know, again, throughout history, there have been children who have not known who their usually biological father is. And I remember I was working with someone when I was writing the book and saying, and the sperm donor, blah blah blah, and he just said, "Yeah, I've never known who my father was because my mum had a fling in her 20s, and I've never known who he was, and she doesn't know who he is." And I was like, "Oh, that's the same scenario, but kind of more accepted by society,
Mm,
weirdly." And there was a loss there for him because he wants to find out who that person was. Um, and so it's not, this whole scenario again isn't new. There's always been fathers who've brought up children who they thought were genetically related to them and they weren't. That's always existed. And there's just always families where there are secrets and things. So is it a human right? So there's a chapter of the book where I interviewed Dorothy Byrne, who was the head of Channel 4 News and Current Affairs, who was actually my boss at the time that I found out about being donor conceived. And she had a child through sperm donor conception in the 90s. And I interviewed her and her daughter, who was sperm donor conceived. And she was quite radical at the time. She was a single mum of a sperm donor conceived daughter. Nobody was talking about it at the time. And her daughter was born pre 2005, but post 1991, where records were kept, but she's not allowed to access them. So there are records of who her genetic father is, but she's not allowed to know. And Dorothy feels very strongly that isn't a right that should have been taken away on her behalf. So she's taken a right away from her own daughter by doing this, and she's like, you shouldn't be able to do that. And she compares it to how adoption files by law were changed so that every child could access their own adoption files. But that's not happened with I think it's about 29,000 donor conceived children between 1991 and 2005. And it's hard not to feel like that is unfair. They they the records exist, but she's not allowed to know unless her donor happens to, and we know most donors don't do this, sign up to a DNA website and come forward. Um, as a person who I only had a year between finding out I was donor conceived and finding out who the donor was. But throughout that year, I did have moments where I woke up in the night and I thought, do I already know him? Do I work with him? Who is he? Is he famous? Is he homeless? Who is he? And that was quite a difficult time. So as I say, I feel lucky to have had that information. I think for Hetty, Dorothy's daughter, she's always known she was donor conceived, and she has accepted very much that she may never find out who the donor is. It's different for different people. I think it would be, yeah, it's a hard question. is it a human right? There's so many different scenarios that it's, where people just haven't been able to find out, donor conceived or otherwise. So I don't know, tricky question.
It is, and I think you've navigated it very well. So thank you. Especially in Hetty's case, for example, I completely agree. And then finally, I couldn't not ask a question on behalf of myself, but obviously for our community as well. The donor conception conversation is not far off usually being one of the top ones in the community, second to just generic male infertility, because there are people who have subfertility, for example. But yeah, the donor conception element of that is such a big topic. So on behalf of anyone considering it now, or perhaps in the process of it, or for people like me on the other side, what advice would you give when it comes to a very broad question, I know, but just what would be your kind of headline advice around donor conception or being a donor conceived child?
Um, for parents, I would just say take the pressure off yourself. Like your child probably won't care that much about how they were conceived, It's more about, the family they're brought up in and how loved they are. Like it really is about that. Um, they're probably not going to have a big identity crisis, and the only reason I had a little one that I've turned into a really positive thing is because I felt like it was a shameful fact. And as long as you're open and honest about it and it's always coming from a place of love and supporting whatever they want to do, I just really don't think you need to worry. As I said, they're so lucky to come from parents, and if you're part of this community, you've already shown how like amazing you are as a parent or a parent to be, because you care that much, and you are doing the research and the groundwork, and you're bothering to understand about how, what to do and how to do it. So yeah, I don't worry too much, and you know, look at it as something to celebrate. It's such a wonderful thing. I can't stress how happy I am to have my sibling. My siblings are amazing. My parents are amazing. The idea that my parents nearly didn't have children or a family breaks my heart. So yeah, I just hope that you feel confident and reassured and can find reasons to celebrate every day.
Oh, amazing. Perfect answer. Thank you so much, Rebecca. I am so grateful for joining us. I say us, me, but obviously for everyone in the community who will benefit from this conversation. And yeah, good luck with everything with the book.
Thank
Where
you.
can people find that? What's the best place?
Yeah, so you can order it online. It's on Amazon. It's actually on offer at the moment on Amazon, or Waterstones or any other online retailer or bookshops. And I'm on Instagram at Rebecca Coxon, and my DMs are open if anyone wants to send me a message. So yeah, but as I say, there's a lot in this book, and we've sort of skimmed the surface. So yeah, if you want to, I've gone into the real nitty-gritty details of everything. So, and it's hopefully very nuanced and hopeful. So yeah, as I was saying to you earlier, like I found out in kind of the worst possible way, and yet, I can still, it's still been a really positive celebratory thing for me. So, and I'm just so pleased to be a kind of like ambassador now for donor conceived people, because I didn't feel like I knew anyone who, so I think I'm really pleased that we're talking about it and that you've got a platform like this to get everyone chatting and create a community.
Oh yeah, that's the thing. It only helps other people. So yeah, thank you so much for not just coming on, but what you're doing as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers.
Take care. Bye.